Insights in History. My name is Marilyn Thompson, and I'm the Marketing Director here at the History Museum. I want to thank the presenting sponsor of Insights in History, Tuesley Hall Canopa. Their generous support helps make this program possible. We miss having you all here in person, but we're very happy that we can bring you this virtual program. So, thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy this month's presentation of Insights in History.
I'm really excited to speak with the community about the work that my students and I did on the campus of Indiana University South Bend, particularly as it relates to the structures, the stories, the situations that occurred before the students appeared on campus. So let me explain a little bit about what we've done. Now, you'll see the bicentennial word on here was because Indiana University started as a college in 1820 and last year celebrated its 200th anniversary. Most of you know Indiana University Bloomington. Indiana University South Bend, however, also has a really long history in the space and in the area of Northwest Indiana. As part of the bicentennial project, my students and I worked to do an archaeological dig on the campus of IU South Bend. There's a lot of material on the north side of the river, the St. Joseph River, and those buildings include an old Coca-Cola bottling factory, the Associates building, there was a South Bend watch factory, there was the tool and die factory, there was an orchard, an armory, all of the material on the north side of the river. But all of that had been pretty much covered over with landscaping and fill and was not really available for archaeological investigations. The south side of the river, however, had lots for us to dig. Now, one important thing I'd like you to know about the archaeological process is it's tedious. Indiana Jones is known as an archaeologist, of course, with the whips and the snakes and guns and punchings of Nazis. We don't do that so much as archaeologists. What we do is take a lot of notes, draw a lot of pictures, record a lot of data, and it's a slow, tedious process, but one to which my students became accustomed and then really enjoyed. The public, of course, also likes to show up and say things like, "Did you find any gold today? Did you find any dinosaurs today?" And really have a discussion about what they remember happened in those areas. Once we collected the material of our excavation and worked at the archives down in Bloomington and with our local libraries, we collected a number of different pieces of information and we wanted to share that with the community. We did this through an exhibit that lasted at the History Museum for quite some time because of the COVID epidemic. Another exhibit couldn't actually be put in, so ours was held over by popular demand. We also turned our exhibit into an online virtual exhibit, one that everybody can still see even though the physical exhibit is closed at the museum. And we think that's a great use of information technology. And when I speak about the history of Indiana University South Bend, in fact South Bend and Indiana itself, we do need to realize that the campus wasn't the first place there. The Associates building and the Studebaker and Playland Park weren't the first people in the area either. This was known for a long time to archaeologists, and in fact, one of the most exciting parts for me of doing the dig was that my sort of great-great-great-grandfather in the field, Glenn Black, came from Bloomington, where he was one of the only archaeologists that existed in the state, up to the South Bend area and studied, or at least wanted to study, right on the south side of the St. Joseph River where the campus housing currently exists. I thought this was fascinating because I got my degree from Indiana University Bloomington in archaeology, so I'm sort of following in the footsteps of this particular man. So in 1937, he came up, was going to work for a while on what he called, or at least was seen in the press here as the, quote, Mound Builder Society. Anthropologists have known that Native people have been living in this area for a very long time. Native people have known that they have been living in this area for a very long time, and that the river itself is what brought everybody to the space. It brings water, it brings transportation, it brings irrigation, it brings all of the things that you would need to live. So the river is very important, and the river that runs through IU South Bend was important for that reason too. Now, when I speak about the people who were first here, I am including the Miami, the Potawatomi, the Kaskaskia, the Peoria, and the Kickapoo. And in some of their traditions, they have been in this area for as long as the area has existed. They've been here forever. In other traditions, they realize that maybe the people have come over in the last 10,000 years or so and have moved their way in. Not these particular tribes, but the tribes from which they are descended. The Potawatomi, of course, are still in this area and still have quite a presence in South Bend. So these are the very first people. There was a very small bit of evidence of their ancestors on our dig as well. And part of that is because we know of this piece of obsidian. It's a tiny little piece here. It's not very exciting. It's just a little rock on your screen. The black volcanic rock, though, comes from the Rocky Mountains, and that's really the only place where it's coming. So what's happening is Native Americans are trading with other groups that are trading with other groups all the way down the line to get these bits of really important raw material all the way from the West Coast to the Midwest. They're also bringing copper down from Upper Peninsula. They're bringing some seashells up from the Gulf. So there's a lot of communication and transportation and contact within Native peoples in this area. Of course, some of us know about the Council Oak. This doesn't exist on IU South Bend's property, but it is near to the river, and it shows how important the river was for both the European traders and settlers, as well as the indigenous people before them. The river also brought really good soil. And that soil turned into a farm, and that farm was about 100 acres of size, and it was called Springbrook Farm. And the Springbrook Farm in 1882 was turned into Springbrook Park. And you'll see the spelling a couple of different ways. I try to consistently use it as one word, but we've seen it in the newspapers in a number of different ways. This clipping from the South Bend Tribune from 1882 talks about the first sort of creation of the park that we now know of as Playland Park on the south bank of the river between South Bend and Mishawaka. And this is exactly the location of where the student housing is now for Indiana University South Bend. Perry Fry started this as a quote, resort, a picnic area. He was a saloon operator, and he was interested in recreation and trying to get new customers to come in and buy foods and get drinks. Springbrook, owned by Perry Fry, lasted for a short time and then was reformed again in 1896 by the General Power and Quick Transit Corporation. This was a trolleyway, and these are the people who are trying to create a destination. The amusement park that eventually became Playland started as a destination for travelers on the trolley. In the newspaper, you can see this is a small pass for baseball players, not the All-American Girl baseball players, but baseball players to come out to Springbrook And then during our dig, we did find a good number of large railroad-size spikes. There was another form of transportation as well, though, and this one really excited me. We don't have any physical evidence of the material left, but these images are of the appropriate time and size of steamer. So this is the Mary Graham. She was made in Benton Harbor in 1884 and sailed through the 1890s and early 1900s up and down the St. Joseph River until she was moved elsewhere as well. And you can see the size of this. This steamer was created, or steamers like this were hired out to move people between the city and Springbrook, and what they called Island Park in Mishawaka and Springbrook. And these ferries, these steamers, were carrying passengers regularly to these points of destination. They weren't the only other forms. There were small rowboats that were doing the same thing, getting people across the river and between the island and this park and between this park and South Bend City. So the rowboat operators were talking about how much money they made specifically at Springbrook Park versus Island Park in Mishawaka, because unlike Island Park, Springbrook was selling alcohol. And a number of passengers wanted to make their way to Springbrook for the purpose of drinking. As tends to happen when there's alcohol involved, there was a number of people who fell off the boats. There was almost a drowning of a young lad who was pulled back up again and rescued by his mates. He then berated them for pulling him up too late. There was a young woman who reached over to try to grab a steamer from the rowboat and tipped over all of her passengers as well. So the newspapers tended to talk a lot about the rowdiness of Springbrook Park. It was a beautiful place, though. It was formed right on this wetlands area, so there was a lot of dredging that could make these small ponds. The ponds were frozen for skating. There was, at this time, roller skating. There was dancing. There were concert halls and bandstands. People went out here to enjoy the fresh air. They left the city and they came together to enjoy the fresh air, to grab things from the concessionaires, and to really kind of just get out of the city for a while. And in 1896 as well, the first year of that new park, is when I know that the grandstands were built. Now, in this particular image, this is a modern image. This is of the existing grandstands and the river crossing apartments for Indiana University South Bend. These may not be exactly the same cement grandstands, although they likely are, but they are exactly at the same place, and they're using exactly the same forms of footing. And you see here a huge amount of cement or concrete. At the time they were being used, these grandstands would have been fully covered. So there was an awning that went over the entire thing, and the seating eventually for the baseball games that happened later was as many as 2,000 people all under the covers on the grandstands, and then seating in the boxes for about 200 in addition to that. So when we were doing some archaeological investigations around this area, the south side of the river was also, dredged and covered over. There's no longer the swimming pool and the pond and all of the other material. It was filled in with a lot of cinder, and we found huge amounts of cinder. But we also found more sort of domestic artifacts of the people that were coming in and out of the area in this early 1900s. This is a bottle cap. It doesn't look like much, but it's a paper milk cap, and this is from Reliable Dairy, and we've dated it to about 1622. Reliable Dairy was just down the road from Springbrook Park. Now, you might know this as Playland Park. It's much more famous. It's where the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League played. It's where the racetracks were. So let's talk a little bit about how it went from Springbrook to Playland. Playland is the new park name in 1925. There was a small prize for the person who gave the winning name, and Playland seemed to work really well. So it's no longer called Springbrook. Now it's Playland, and let's see where it goes from here. Playland has a roller coaster. It's got a much bigger concert hall, and they're bringing in all the big bands of the time. They're bringing in sports athletes of the time as well. In 1926, shortly after the opening of Playland, Babe Ruth is said to have barnstormed through the area. So you can see these people walking very carefully around. It's terraced. There's lots of cement. There's lots of hardscaping, and it's a wonderful place for the people of South Bend and Mishawaka and Elkhart to come and visit. We found a little bit more archaeology slightly later. This is a 1930 piece of ceramic dishware, and my students were fascinated by this particular piece because, unlike small books or toys that we see maybe when we were growing up in cereal boxes, these dishes came from a box of oatmeal. It's the Tudor Rose brand. It's very easy and very cheap to make, very easy and cheap to make, and therefore distribute free in boxes of oatmeal, and my students were just fascinated by that particular topic. Now, moving ahead to 1946, that's when all of the excitement really comes to a head because the South Bend Blue Sox leave their previous stadium at Bendix Field and set up their new home in Playland. This particular advertisement looks like makes them into superheroes. They're flying, and there's bright, radiant lines, and it's really exciting to get people out to the ballpark. And people attended. A lot of people attended. The first week's attendance in 1946, the first 5 games, attracted more than 15,000 spectators. And in fact, over the entire season, from May to August, there were as many as 120,000 fans coming to watch the Blue Sox play at Playland Park. 40% of them are women and children. There's famous players. Gene Fault was one of the best players. All of them were really impressive, and these are the folks who eventually get turned into or get celebrated with the League of Their Own movie. And their material is still held at the History Museum, and the archives are there. There's a number of artifacts, and people can go and see all of the fantastic material from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It lasted about 12 years or so at the location of Playland Park. You can still see the the grandstands. They're at as you're looking at this, the right end of the circle. In the middle is the baseball diamond itself, and there's the large oval track going around. So in 1954, there were race cars, there were fireworks. The 4th of July fireworks were set off at the Playland Park, the baseball stadium itself. People could attend and watch from the grandstands. The dirt track racing was popular. NASCAR even held one event at Playland Park. Baseball was happening, both men and women. There's also football. There was track and field events. There were all sorts of the 4-H fair brought in 50,000 guests because it too was held at Playland Park. Basically, everything was happening at this particular place. Sadly, the league itself closed after the 1954 season. It just couldn't keep up with the attendance anymore. The finances were hard, league-wide, and the men's baseball games were back after the war, and they were attracting the same type of an audience. So Playland Park needed to change. 1954 was not only the last baseball game, it was the last racetrack as well. A lot of things were starting to deteriorate a little bit. But it did remain used because it changed in 1962 to the Playland golf course. And we found, in fact, a range ball stamped with Playland when we were digging in the same spots. Now, of course, students are using the river and the space on either side. This regatta is of 1970s era Indiana University South Bend students. And in this one, we see the more common era IU South Bend students. Now, after the bridge was built and the land was purchased from the golf course, now as many as 800 rooms are available for Indiana University South Bend students to live on campus. And that's exactly what they do. Not only is there living, though, there's also learning. So I want to give a shout out to all of the students who worked with me on the archaeological project. You can see them here. And in the background is the existing 1896 grandstand. So it's amazing. It's the only thing from that period that still remains standing, and it's the oldest thing on all of IU South Bend's campus. These grandstands are a monument to all that has happened in that particular area. And on the other image, there's an ice cream pie. But the reason I'm showing this one, it's the same students. Now they're doing work inside the lab. But it's a good way to show stratigraphy, because that's what the students spend a lot of time in. As they're digging, they're not just finding treasure. They're finding the context of all of the material found with relationship. So I gave you a lot of information. I threw material at you because there's so much exciting stuff going on Playland Park. But just to reiterate, here's the timeline of what happened. Of course, it all began with Indigenous use. It became Springbrook Park from Springbrook Farm in 1882. It became rowdy. It was a little bit on the rough side, and it changed into Playland Park in 1925 and lasted until 1961. The Blue Sox themselves played from 46 to 54. And then Playland Golf Course was created in 1961 and started up in 1962, and it lasted until the early 1990s when Indiana University bought the property. The bridge was put in, and eventually in 2008, the river crossing apartments were opened. So I appreciate your attention. I hope you enjoyed some of the small stories I could share, and there's so much more fantastic material that's maybe not in the ground anymore at the old Playland Park, but it's still in the newspapers. It's still in the memories of the people who were living and attending those events there. Thanks for your attention.